Hello and welcome in to another episode of The Hard Fowl. I'm your host, Pearson Fowler, and with me, as always, from GamecockCentral.com is Colin Taylor. Now, Colin, this is The Hard Fowl. That's a generic, open-ended basketball name, although we mostly do South Carolina basketball. Every once in a while, we will venture into bigger picture SEC basketball, sometimes even the national picture around college basketball, and sprinkle in a little bit of NBA. And I will just put as a full disclosure right here, there's some big recruiting news for South Carolina that we're going to start with and was the initial impetus for this podcast. But we're recording this Thursday morning, and in light of the NBA's cancellation and it seems like postponement of their season as of right now, my understanding is that the NBA players and Board of Governors are set to meet here a little bit later this morning to decide the immediate future of the season. And while that is a little bit outside of our purview, this is still a basketball podcast, so we're going to talk about that. We will save it till the end of the podcast. So if you have decided that that's not any kind of coverage that you want, that'll be at the end of the podcast. And in the meantime, we will talk South Carolina basketball. We'll talk about some bigger picture SEC storylines in just a minute, but just wanted to put here as a full disclosure, we are going to talk about that, but we are going to save it for the end of the podcast. Colin, in the world of South Carolina, everything seems to have been going smoothly. You mentioned the basketball program is in an on-court phase, not quite starting the preseason, but doing a little bit more than just working out. Obviously, you do a lot of great football coverage. You have a piece up on the website right now on GamecockCentral.com about Luke Doty and what his role is going to be this season. So you're busy. College sports are back in full swing in terms of how we're talking about them. And while we're really looking forward to the season, it's just amazing. The recruiting never sleeps. Obviously, basketball a little farther away than football, so not hugely surprising to get some basketball recruiting news. And we don't do as much of that because there are just fewer spots, so fewer recruits to talk about in basketball. But yesterday, or actually it may have even been like the night before, because it was like at midnight or 1 a.m., very late, South Carolina got a big commitment from Carlos Williams, who's a 3-star small forward. Walk me through his recruitment, starting with how he decided on midnight/1 a.m. to announce his decision.
Yeah, I think you can hear the pain in my voice when I'm talking about having to break or announce a commitment at 1 a.m. It was his birthday, Wednesday, so that's why he wanted to do it. Then did it. He's from Mississippi, so obviously 1 a.m. is midnight Central Time. So yeah, 1 a.m. He originally told me when we were talking before his commitment, as things were kind of trending that way, I asked him when he was going to announce, and he said 1 p.m. Eastern Time on Wednesday, and then obviously moved it up to really delve into it with his birthday and then make it kind of a little bit more sentimental for him. So that's where that is right now. And it's from a recruitment standpoint, it happened pretty quick. South Carolina, I've been tracking him for about a year. Watched him play after a few coaches reached out to him to South Carolina. Watched him play this summer, really liked what they saw. Then obviously went and offered him late July, had him on, quote unquote, on campus for a virtual visit. Loved what he heard from Frank Martin, loved what he heard from Bruce Shingler, and pulled the trigger on the commitment this week and kind of wrapped up the process pretty quickly. A guy that kind of knew what he wanted and moved on from there, yeah.
So we've, I guess Wes and Chris and I on another Carolina podcast have talked a lot about how the recruiting cycle has changed with recruiting being shut down. Obviously, no on-campus visits are happening. Even the immediate future of that as the football season draws a little bit closer is uncertain. But again, basketball recruiting is a little bit different. Not that any sort of recruiting isn't about relationships, but basketball recruiting seems particularly about relationships. You're talking about a smaller group of guys. You're talking about more fit. You're talking about a lot of small things that you don't necessarily have to talk about with football. But this is a guy, class of 2021. He still has his senior year pending, but with so much up in the air, I guess at this point we should probably assume that basketball seasons are going to happen, since most high school football seasons are going to happen at some point. Some of them have been pushed back to the spring, but they're going to happen at some point, and basketball starting as late as it does, that you think that would, I guess, mostly answer those questions. But Colin, do you anticipate, or I guess what changes do you anticipate for this class of 2021 in general, in terms of what kind of impact the pandemic will have had on the class? Yeah,
I think you're going to see, just in talking with some assistance in South Carolina. I did a piece right when quarantine started where I talked to Chuck Martin and Bruce Shingler about kind of how that's going to impact it. And, Chuck made a really good point that you're going to see a lot more guys potentially go to prep school for a year and reclassify, kind of do what Devin Carter did, going from the 2020 class to the 2021 class and getting another year of essentially kind of prep school ball, which is a little bit different than high school, but not quite college yet. So it's kind of a gap year, for lack of a better word, and where you can kind of hone your game a little bit. I could see guys doing a little bit of that. So for those of you who kind of don't know how the recruitment process works, is a lot of these guys play high school ball, which is somewhat important, but the real important piece in terms of recruitment is these live AAU periods where guys get out and go to all these different events with thousands of other kids, whether it's sponsored by Adidas, Nike, Under Armour, wherever, and they play on these circuits for the summer, and college coaches, it's a really easy way for college coaches to go out and watch 10, 12, 20 guys over the course of a weekend, and it's easy to recruit that way and meet the people that that are obviously involved in their recruitment, from their family, their coaches, whoever. And that's kind of washed up this year. The Nike's EYBL circuit obviously postponed. You didn't have Peach Jam. You didn't have any of these big tournaments that normally go in and help these guys get recruited. So a lot of these 2021 guys who would have gone and made some big strides or whatever didn't get that opportunity. So I could see a lot of these guys who don't have as many opportunities as maybe, the top, 1%, 2% of these guys in the class, take a year of prep school, go wait for the live period with the class of 2022, and then kind of see where the chips fall after that. Because it's hard. And if you didn't have enough traction, enough attention before this shutdown, then all of a sudden you're not going to be getting the same level of attention that you might have if, everything kind of went off without a hitch.
And that seems like a scenario in which relationships that are established early on in a player's recruiting cycle are going to pay dividends. So not that schools like Kentucky and North Carolina and Duke don't identify talent early, because they do, and I think they're in early on guys, but they also have the ability to swoop in late in a kid's recruitment and say, hey, we know you have these 11 other offers, but here's an offer from Kentucky. That's better than anything you have. It seems like maybe that will have a little bit less weight and maybe happen a little bit less if those schools that, again, are going to come in late won't necessarily have the opportunities to do the scouting later in the process, and for a kid that maybe wants to commit a little bit early, because for Carlos Williams, again, like, he still has his senior year to play. I don't know what a timeline would normally be for a kid like this. 3 stars, has offers from places like Baylor, Houston, both the big Mississippi schools. This seems like a little bit of an early commit, and I wonder if we would just see more of that, not for fear of not getting another spot elsewhere, but just I guess with the understanding that the back end of this entire recruiting cycle might be a little bit up in the air depending on what these camps end up looking like. So we've seen it a little bit with football where guys kind of tried to get in early. Will Muschamp referred to a lot of them as reservations, maybe more than commitments. But I wonder if that will see more schools like South Carolina and some of the smaller schools that have to get in early with some of these guys benefiting more than the bigger schools.
Yeah, and I think that, it does benefit South Carolina. I mean, you look at Carlos in particular had some big offers, was actually really considering Baylor for a very long time before they took 2 other wings in the class. And and it's one of these things too, where if you're a kid that, you obviously want to see this recruitment process out, but you don't know what the spring evaluation period is going to look like. And you have an offer you like, say for Carlos Williams, you love South Carolina, you love the coaching staff. Why wait and delay things in terms of a commitment? Now, he's going to sign in the spring, but why delay your commitment until the spring, hoping for anything else when you don't know what the spring's going to look like? So it makes sense for guys like him, for guys like Jacoby Wright, to obviously kind of go ahead and commit. And, if you like the offer, because, you don't know what this is going to look like. And, if you love the school and you love the program, why not just go ahead and pull that trigger?
And so for Williams, he's a kid from Mississippi, and we know that basketball recruiting isn't as regionalized as a lot of other sports. And I don't know exactly why that is. Maybe we'll have to do a deep dive into exactly why that is, or you can give us a TLDR. But by and large, geography doesn't determine those things in the same way that it does for football. But I wonder if we will see maybe a little more regionalization, as, again, it's just sort of the players that coaches have more readily available access to. But regardless, for South Carolina to go into the state of Mississippi and beat out both Ole Miss and Mississippi State feels like a significant get for South Carolina, even if you look at it and say, 3 stars, whatever. I mean, that's great, that's good, that's, the star rating, we can kind of have a referendum on that too, but we don't need to do that right now. But beyond looking at that, again, I always like to look at offer lists and say, who else wanted this kid? And not only did the Mississippi schools want him, but for Carolina to go get this kid out of their backyard, I think speaks to a level of stability. And again, Frank Martin's always been a good recruiter, always been someone that can sell the vision of his program, and I think is very respected in the basketball world. But now I think we're just seeing, I don't know, maybe another level as South Carolina gets more of a reputation as a real. Again, it's weird because they're not contenders. They haven't been to the Final Four in a couple years, but it seems like within the basketball community, there is just more consensus that South Carolina is building something, and it is a place to go, and it is, as we've talked about, somewhere that can develop a kid into a pro-level talent. And in the meantime, you're at least going to be competitive in one of the handful of best conferences in college basketball.
Yeah, I mean, you're not having to sell a vision anymore. I mean, when Frank first got here, you were around, you understood where that program was when he first took over. And the record kind of showed. And he really had to sell a vision at that point. He really had to sell, hey, come help us build something here, instead of, hey, come help us take the next step in terms of, consistently making the tournament. So, like when you're able to go into a recruit's home or now on these virtual visits and talk about graduation rate and talk about, getting education while also vying for an NCAA tournament spot and competing for, top 4 finishes in the SEC, which they've been doing for, a while now. It helps. And you're seeing that in recruiting. And you look back and, the 2018 class, probably one of Frank's best classes to date. 19, again, one of Frank's best classes to date. 2020 still obviously remains to be seen. 2021 still remains to be seen, but you have talent in those classes, and they're in with a lot more guys that have a lot of stars next to their name or have a pretty high number when it comes to their, national ranking. And it's because of the perception of the program. It's because he hired really good assistants with really good recruiting skills, and you're seeing the benefits of that. And, now instead of just being able to take some guys to fill out a roster, at times, they can kind of be a little bit more selective and recruit and pulling guys that they really want instead of having to try to sell a dream or sell a vision for the program. And that really helps in recruiting. And you're kind of seeing it on the trail right now.
And with all that said, Williams listed at 6'6", 230, again, still with a year of high school basketball to play, so he has another year to grow. I don't know how much taller he's going to get, and then, of course, once you get into a college weight program, you can really transform your body, but someone that already physically looks ready, to sort of play the part in that swingman 3, maybe 4 kind of role for South Carolina. So from the conversations that you've had and from what you've seen of Williams, what kind of player is South Carolina getting?
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that was described to me as the second best player in Mississippi right now, just in the entire state. And he's athletic. He can dribble the ball for a guy that's built like a damn SEC linebacker. I think 6'6", 238 pounds is what he is. So he dribbles the ball really well. His shot's coming around defensively. He's kind of where South Carolina wants him to be. They really, really like his game and think he can come in and make an impact early, but turn into one of those really, really good, like 4-year players to where you look up and as a sophomore, junior, senior, he's playing pretty pivotal minutes and playing them well. Mm-hmm. So they kind of like his upside too. They like his game where it is right now and kind of where it projects to be. And he's another guy that, yes, you know, he had offers from Baylor and Houston and the Mississippi schools, but kind of underrated too because he didn't get this live period this summer to the extent that, you know, they would normally get it. So coaches weren't able to really get into a gym and watch him play. And that helped kind of keep him maybe a little bit under the radar compared to some other things. I know once South Carolina started showing interest, Texas A&M really started to try to get into the mix with him too. And yeah, it's one of those things where he's got a really good game, can dribble the ball well, can push the pace, can finish around the rim, get to the rim, which is important in Frank Martin's system, and a guy that they really kind of flew under the radar for a lot of other teams and took away from some of the big boys around him, which is a pretty big get for South Carolina. And I know I'm rambling, but we talk about others, you know, you talk about in-state recruiting at South Carolina and, you know, other schools coming into, you know, South Carolina and pulling people away and out of state. But South Carolina just went into Mississippi and landed a recruit over Ole Miss and Mississippi State. So there's something to be said for that too.
So I see 6'6", and I'm thinking 3'4", and you mentioned his handling ability. So I'm imagining a Keyshawn Bryant type. Now, obviously a little bit bigger than Bryant. I don't know what Bryant's listed at. Probably, you know, 210 maybe. I have no idea. It sounds like this guy's already a little bit bigger. Is it that level of handle, and does he have that kind of explosiveness, or is he going to be, you know, maybe more in the Justin Minaya mold with a little more, maybe with a little more bounce off the dribble?
Probably a little bit. I would say a mixture of both. I don't think he's as explosive right now as Keyshawn Bryant, or Keyshawn Bryant was coming out of high school. But he's good. I mean, he's a guy that has some explosive dunks, probably a little bit more physical than Bryant, probably more in the mold there of Minaya, but a guy that can obviously do a lot of different things, and I think they're going to ask him to once he gets on campus.
That's Carlos Williams, again, 3 stars, Baylor, Houston, Mississippi State, Ole Miss, class of 2021. I guess I'll ask you this, too, because I've been asking Wes and Chris this as it pertains to the football commits. I say that in air quotes because, again, Will Muschamp has said a lot of them, especially the ones that are earlier in the process, maybe a little more reservations than commits. But is this a pretty solid commitment from Williams?
Yeah. I mean, I know he wants to wait till the spring, and I think he mentioned on Phil Kornbluth's show that it was because his grandfather passed away in April, so he wants to sign in April to kind of honor his memory. So that's kind of why he wants to wait. But, I mean, even he tweeted the other day, he said he's 120% committed to South Carolina. So I don't think I'm worried about his commitment right now. Obviously, when a guy waits, obviously you're worried about other schools kind of swooping in, but I'm not overtly worried about that right now.
So there we go. If anything changes with Williams, we will certainly let you know right here on the podcast. I'm sure Colin Taylor will have it on GamecockCentral.com and his Twitter feed before we get a chance to even talk about it on here. So follow him there, read him there, and he'll have all the updates you need as it pertains to South Carolina basketball. Before we zoom out and talk a little SEC basketball, we talked last week just about South Carolina getting back on the court, workouts. Nothing has changed, no timeline, no updates. And again, this is, I think, a case of no news is good news, but no big news out of South Carolina's basketball preseason in the last week or so?
Not really. I mean, everything's kind of going off, and they're kind of getting ready to amp things up this week, and we should know more about kind of where things stand as the month ends and we get into September.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess if the entire South Carolina basketball program had to shut down because of a coronavirus outbreak, we would know about it. So it's good that we don't know anything because it means that probably has not happened. So again, we'll keep you posted on that, and especially once we get a clearer picture of what the schedule is going to look like, which Colin outlined the timeline for that in last week's podcast. So still probably a couple weeks off from that, but we'll keep you posted as soon as we find anything out. The big story in the SEC, and this is, I guess, been the big story for a while or has been the big story before, but yesterday the NCAA came out and said that they have more evidence that Will Wade has paid ineligible players impermissible benefits. As many as 11 players were named. And, you know, Colin, we've kind of gone through this entire story before. It's like almost a year ago, maybe even over a year ago at this point. The FBI was involved. They found a wiretap. So based on what you have learned in the last 24, 48 hours, what is new in the Will Wade saga from what we had already learned about a year ago?
Nothing. I mean, I feel like you're reading this article and you're like, yeah, we knew all this stuff. I'm not shocked by it. I mean, when you have Will Wade on wiretaps saying, and excuse my language, but, you know, we're going to make him a strong-ass offer, like, that leads you to believe that something nefarious was going on there, and now it looks like, you know, we have more proof to be in the pudding. And not shocked. I think that this is something that's been kind of building for a while, and not shocked in one bit that Will Wade has been kind of caught up in this, because it feels like it's been a long time coming.
Right, and I guess at the time I was like, well, this is bad news for him, and you know, of course, it was wait and see because it was the FBI investigation, and the NCAA had to go through whatever its own protocols were. And I guess whenever you enter the NCAA, you always have to put the asterisk and the caveat. It's like, well, we don't know what the NCAA is going to do with all of this information that seems just abundantly clear. But again, based on what we learned a year ago, based on, I guess, the development yesterday, I mean, I guess I'll just ask it like this, sort of cynically, but I mean, do you expect anything to happen with Will Wade? Because if he were going to be fired, it seems like it would have happened over a year ago. I understand the NCAA wants to, you know, run through its discourse and, again, its protocols, but do you imagine that this I guess, that the NCAA finally getting around to it will actually change the course of his career or LSU basketball or basketball in the SEC?
Remains to be seen. I mean, I've been saying for a while, it's really hard to see Will Wade keeping his job, yet here he is in Baton Rouge, still able to recruit and coach and do all this stuff. So who knows? I think that you're getting to the point where you're making a stronger case to relieve him of his duties. I know he restructured his contract to be fired with cause if he gets a level 1 violation levied against him. And the way things are going, the article yesterday from ESPN looks like a lot of level 1 violations.
I just can't figure out why this has taken so long. Again, when you have all this on a wiretap, and again, I got an ESPN notification a couple days ago when it was like, Will Wade had made impermissible payments to at least 11 recruits. I was like, didn't we already know this? And not only that, but like I don't know how extensive the investigation had to be if you have everything on a wiretap. You know, I don't know how this has been so complicated. So I feel like I don't expect anything to happen at this point, and I don't know what kind of precedent that sets. And again, we know the NCAA is inconsistent at best with its punishments. But when this FBI story broke for the first time, you know, two and a half, maybe even 3 years ago, I don't remember when exactly it broke, but I just remember sitting outside of this building that I'm in right now, thinking like, man, this could blow the whole thing up. And you know, some heads have rolled, but it has largely sort of blown over, and this was you know, kind of another entry in that, and it seems like kind of the same thing. So you know, Colin, I don't know if this is ever going to change like I thought it was. I don't know if it needs to change. I mean, it would be nice, I guess, because college basketball and the AAU system that feeds into it are so corrupt. But I mean, if this does not yield any significant punishment, any significant slap on the wrist, example making, and I'm not saying necessarily that it should. I don't want to be draconian and call for capital punishment or anything here, but it just seems like if nothing comes of this, then I just don't know what the point of you know, even having the NCAA as an organizing body to try to keep these things from happening is anymore.
Yeah, I mean, what's the saying? Like, the only thing a good 10-foot wall is good for is sales for 11-foot ladders. I mean, like,
yeah.
I mean, you know, if you crack down on the way he's doing it, another coach is going to find another better way to do it and find a way to circumvent rules. It's been going on for years. It will continue to go on for years. And you know, I know that's probably macabre of me to talk about, or, you know, pessimistic, or, you know, whatever you want to call it. But I mean, when it's been going on for the way it's been going on, and it's hard to see it changing unless, you know, sweeping changes are made to either the NCAA or the AAU circuit or things like that. It's hard to see. And don't get me wrong, there are great AAU coaches out there. I've met them. I talked to them. There are really good ones out there. But, you know, one rotten apple can ruin the bunch. A few rotten apples can ruin the entire thing sometimes. And that's kind of where we are right now with the AAU circuit and the games and stuff like that.
How will this impact recruiting? Because on the one hand, I imagine players will look at this and say, well, hey, you know, there's some instability there. I don't want to go to a program that's, you know, maybe going to get slapped with, all sorts of, punishments, reduction of scholarship, all these kinds of things. But on the other hand, word's getting around. It's like, hey, Will Wade's going to pay you, and if you're not going to get in trouble for it, maybe that's going to help LSU in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to change a little bit. You're already seeing some shifts in kind of the way the summer's structured with fewer live events from an AAU circuit point, and they're actually they did a weekend. They would have done it this year if they obviously had a live period, but where you play with your high school team, where you play, in your home state with your high school team in kind of a jamboree situation over the summer, which gives coaches obviously a chance to go out and watch and do all this, stuff. And I think you might see a little bit more of that, more playing with your high school team, more playing kind of localized instead of flying to Vegas and, New York or Indianapolis or Georgia or wherever for a weekend. You might play with your high school team at a centralized location in the state or something like that to get a little bit more exposure there, and coaches can kind of divvy up how they go. So I think you're going to see some small tweaks. Things are kind of trending in that direction, and it'll be interesting to track as, more stuff comes out about Will Wade and kind of the AAU programs that are trying to capitalize on these kids in ways they probably shouldn't.
So there are 353, is that the number, or 354 Division I college basketball programs?
I think 353.
353, all right. So of the 353, how many have at least one member of the coaching staff doing something like this? Again, maybe not on the scale where you have 11 recruits, which is like, 3 full classes worth. But we know that this is happening in a lot of places. Is it happening in 353 places? Is it happening in 300, or is it only happening in 53?
Yeah, I'd probably tend to, fewer than most. Now if you ask me what percentage of the 353 have had coaches that have contemplated it, I would say a lot more.
Yeah.
Just because there's so much pressure around it to win and to get a lot of these coaches want to win these recruiting battles and win recruiting rankings and land as many top 50 or top 100 or 150 kids that there is pressure to offer this or that or the other, or listen to agents or these AAU coaches or shoe companies, and there's pressure there. But I don't think a lot of the coaches are really taking that next step and capitalizing on it. And it's a small percentage, I would think. And the problem is that you have this small percentage of top schools that are doing it that are going to ruin it for the rest of the bunch, because it's been so rampant in those, the schools that are doing it are schools that are doing it rampantly. Mm-hmm. And that's the issue that the NCAA has got to figure out.
Well, the reason that I ask is not because I'm trying to get anybody in trouble, and I'm not trying to get you in trouble or you to out anybody or anything like that, but just to say it seems like this is happening a lot. And if your estimation is right, then I think that what's happening now is probably the right solution in terms of just saying, hey, we will do what we can. And again, you can't trust the NCAA to get these things right, but at least in terms of just trying to identify the people that are actually doing it wrong. Because my inclination would be, and based on nothing really, would just be that it's happening in more places than fewer. And if that's the case, like, is there something dramatically that needs to shift in terms of how this is regulated within college basketball? You hinted at some tweaks here and there, but does this? How do you approach this? I guess like you said, if it's happening at fewer places, then you try to just do what you can to nip those like smaller isolated instances in the bud. But if this is more widespread, if it's as widespread as I think it is, how do you fix that?
Yeah, you got to scale back on the AAU side of things. If someone's, I guess, I hate using the, addicted to something, you take away those things and you get them help, and you tweak it to where they can't have access to some of those things. Same with AAU. Like, if the AAU system is running rampant, you kind of scale back on the number of AAU events and AAU things that you can go to or you can see or things like that. And the high school league evaluation things are something that's kind of taken hold. And I know Frank Martin likes it a lot, and because we talked to him at one of those events last year about it, and he kind of went on the record on it, and he likes it. And I think that if you scale back some of the AAU stuff, which is what they've kind of tried to do, I'm not in favor of getting rid of AAU as a whole. I think AAU does a lot of good things, but kind of balancing it out between the number of high school events you can have over the summer versus the number of AAU events, to where you kind of see players in different settings, and it helps the evaluation period, and it tries to cut down on some of the, nefarious things that are going on the way they're going on.
I wonder if some of this will change too. Now, again, I think it'll change. I think it'll sort of move the line more than eliminate it. But as the NBA has their eyes, their calendars circled in pencil, 2022 is the date that they're going to allow high schoolers into the NBA directly out of high school without having to go do the one-and-done route. And as the G League becomes a more viable option, as we've seen in the last couple of years, a lot of players, a lot of top high schoolers are either choosing to go abroad or specifically this coming year choosing to take their talents to the G League, if indeed there is a G League, and we're going to talk about that, the NBA part of this in just a second. But I wonder how much that moves the line, because you're eliminating essentially the highest market guys. If you say someone like Zion's going to fetch $500,000 to go play college basketball, and he in an alternate universe decides to go straight to the NBA, goes to the G League, takes the RJ Hampton route, and goes to New Zealand or whatever, that sort of moves the line. Now, there's still going to be a top class of players that are actually in college basketball, but they represent, I think, a smaller portion of the market value when you look at how much is required to get these guys on campus and into programs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for players going to the G League, players going to overseas or wherever. The more good basketball we get, number one in America and number two across the world, is a good thing, I think. College basketball will be fine if Zion does not play in it. College basketball will be fine if Emily Bates does not play in it. I think it's going to change a little bit, and I think that you're going to have more guys choosing the G League because, you can say, unless a kid really wants to go to college and really wants to play in the NCAA tournament and make a Final Four or whatever, you're going to say, well, why should I risk taking X amount of money from this coach if that does happen, to potentially have things blow up and put this school in, on probation or, have sanctions levied against them, or where I could take that money again and go play in the G League or go play overseas, to where I'm not having, I'm a professional at that point. I don't have to worry about where the money comes from or any recruiting violations or things like that. So it's going to change. I think college basketball is going to be fine if, you don't get Zion per se or whatever. But you're still going to have good players. Like when the one and done rule was still going on, college basketball was fine without Kobe Bryant, was fine without LeBron James or Kevin Garnett or things like that, because you have other stars. I mean, when you look at, let's say the one and done rule put Zion out, you're still going to have other players that don't go one and done. You're only going to have maybe 2, 3, 4 guys that are really one and dones, and the rest of them have to come to school or have to go to, the G League or whatever. For Zion's year, you still would have had Grant Williams. You still would have probably had Jarrett Culver, Carson Edwards, Cassius Winston, Brandon Clark, all these guys that are good players that still give you some star power in college basketball. So I think that's going to be absolutely fine if things change the way where players go, where things, how things stand there.
And that's always been my case. It's like I said, it's going to move the line, but you're still going to, someone's still going to be the best player in college basketball, and he's still going to be really good, and he's still probably going to have an NBA career. But if in the meantime what it means is we get a little more continuity, especially for the the more mid-sized programs. Was it Purdue a couple years ago that made the NCAA tournament and had 70 seniors on their team, and then the next year it's like, kind of back to square one. But it's a fun story, and you see teams that are built like that. I think, they play differently, and there's sort of a different feel to the game. And if we get a little more diversity and a few more of those programs to intersperse with, the teams that are just chock full of one and dones, or at least have 1 or 2 one and dones and then a couple of veterans around them, I think that's good for the game. So again, I think all this is going to start to change, even if and this is a whole big tangent. We started talking about Will Wade, but even if nothing happens with Will Wade, I think some of these other things that are in motion with regards to the college basketball the current state of college basketball in the NBA will start to kind of to move and shift some of these things, and hopefully, I think for the better. But again, Will Wade, impermissible benefits, as many as 11 players. Again, I don't know how different I expect this to go this time. I guess the first time was the FBI. This is the NCAA, so the NCAA can actually do something, but what they actually do remains to be seen, and we'll continue to monitor that as sort of a developing story. Before we get out of here, as I mentioned at the top of the podcast, and I almost felt weird not starting with this because this is the biggest story in sports right now, but I said this is mostly a Carolina basketball podcast, so we do a little Carolina basketball, a little SEC, but as we sit here again recording on a Thursday morning, the NBA had 3 games scheduled for yesterday, all of which were boycotted by the players. I think it was basically started by the Bucks. The Bucks and the Magic were supposed to play at 4. This charge was led by the Milwaukee Bucks, and they said, we're not going to play this game as a boycott to try to bring attention to the continued racial injustices, particularly police brutality, all around the country in light of Jacob Blake's shooting in Wisconsin just a couple of days ago. The rest of the players on the rest of the teams that were supposed to play yesterday followed suit. Last night, the Lakers and Clippers agreed that they wanted to postpone the season while the other 28 teams, or I guess the other 14 teams that are currently involved in the playoffs, well, I guess fewer than that now because a couple have been eliminated, but the other teams said, no, we want to keep playing the season. And it makes sense, and this now becomes a very complicated issue, one that I expect to kind of come to a head here in the next couple of days, as again the NBA Board of Governors are set to meet a little bit later this morning, as are the NBA players and the Players Association. And I guess I said the playoff teams, but I guess all the teams would probably be involved in this if it gets to some sort of collective bargaining issue between the MBPA and the NBA Board of Governors. But Colin, this is in some ways a very clear and easy to define issue. The NBA players have a platform, and they're taking advantage of it to draw attention, again, to the racial injustices that are being perpetrated across the country right now, and saying, we have this platform, we feel like this will cause people to pay attention and to, I guess, try to affect a positive change that as yet has not been affected, clearly. But on the other hand, to me, it feels precarious because in some ways they are taking away their platform. And I wonder if playing the games, and I understand, having Black Lives Matter on the court and having different sayings, verbiages on the back of their jerseys in support of various movements, Black Lives Matter and related movements, I think there is a lot of power to that. But more than that, we saw just a couple nights ago, Doc Rivers, after the Clippers beat the Mavericks, he's in a media room. He's full of reporters, TV cameras, newspaper writers, blog writers, radio people, all sorts of people. He has a captive audience, more eyeballs on him than he will ever have, and he's able to use that platform to speak his mind. Said some, incredibly moving things, very emotional, very raw. Those things went viral. And I wonder if, I'm not saying that this is not well-intentioned, but I wonder if in the long term it would be more beneficial for the players to continue to use the platform that they have than to take away their platform, which I'm worried is what they're doing right now.
Yeah, I watched Doc Rivers' comments yesterday. I watched the NBA on TNT's response to them that night. Kenny the Jet, man, he was phenomenal on Tuesday night talking about it, and obviously made a big move walking off set yesterday. And then Chris Webber's been pretty, he had some pretty strong words on Wednesday as the news was trickling out. And whether you agree with it or not, it's historic. Sports has kind of always been, you hear it all the time with, in wartime and during a pandemic and during fights for racial and social justice. Sports has been the distraction. Sports has been, for the most part, now I'm not saying sports and politics because they have, crossed paths for decades, but you hear it all the time about sports being the distraction from the regular world. This is the players coming out and saying we're not going to be the distraction anymore. The players are saying we're not going to be the people that let you take a break from the crap that's going on in the world, and we want you to have to think about it. We want you to have to really sit down and critically think about all of these things, and whether or not you agree with it, that's pretty powerful. And I think that this is not the end. I mean, you've seen it in the MLB, and it's something that's going to have to change. I mean, you're going to have to see some change if you want the NBA back. You're going to have to see some change if you want MLB teams to continue to play. I don't think this is going away for a while, and this is kind of the norm now, and players are using their platform more than, they have in a very, very long time. And people can say, well, we won't, you get paid millions of dollars and you're on TV and whatever to say these things, and you shouldn't use this platform the way you're doing. But, when you do have the platform you have and you are a multimillionaire and you have eyeballs on you, why not use your platform for whatever you want to say? And whether people agree with it or not, this is a peaceful protest. This is a peaceful boycott. They haven't hurt anybody. They haven't, done anything like that. And so this is going to be the norm for a little bit, I think, as, people really want change. And I think you're not going to see that end anytime soon.
I don't think so either. And again, I fully support them using their platform this way. And it's I mean, I don't know what to call it, ironic, spooky, coincidental, whatever, but that this all happened yesterday on August 26th, and I'm sure you've seen this by now, but it was exactly 4 years ago, August 26, 2016, that Colin Kaepernick first took a knee during the national anthem. And even at that time, I was outspokenly in support of Colin Kaepernick, and that was very unpopular around here, at least as I was espousing that. But I said I fully support what Colin Kaepernick is doing. I think that something needs to be done, and I appreciate him using his platform like this. But I fear that his message is going to get lost, and people are going to make it about the knee. People are going to make it about the national anthem, and they're not going to make it about police brutality. They will find a way to sort of distort this. And look, if you're out to do that, you're going to find a way to distort anything. But I wonder how long the NBA doing this. I wonder how long it continues to be, because right now it's a huge story, and it should be, and it will be. It will be for a while, especially if they boycott and they abandon the playoffs, right at the end of the first round. That's going to be a huge story. That's going to have a very long impact. And if this goes into next year, and I've already seen conversations about a potential lockout, if that continues, then I think that's a good thing. But what worries me is that for the vast majority of people, obviously, Colin, you and I are the exception, because we are inundated with sports all the time. That's our job. But for the vast majority of people, if the NBA goes away, then those players just aren't going to have the same platform. Again, it works today. It works in the short term. And I also don't think they should just get back and play today, because if you boycott yesterday and then you get back today, I don't really know, other than like saying, hey, listen to us, but also we're going to get back to it. Like, I think for them it's important to set some goals and say, we need this to be done before we can get back to playing. So I don't think that they should just get back to it, because I think that in some ways diminishes what they did yesterday. But like long term, my mom is not a sports fan. She, I'm sure, knows about this because it's a huge story. But if this goes on for months and months and months, she's not someone that's going to tune into the NBA anyway, but she's going to hear even less from LeBron James, Doc Rivers. I'm sure these things have crossed her timeline because, these guys are using their platform like this. But if they just go away, she, who I think is a pretty representative part of the population, is not going to. It just isn't going to get any of that content. Just isn't going to see any of their platform or any of what they're trying to do. So I think there's a delicate balancing act here. And again, it's really hard for me to sit up here, and I'm not going to criticize. I have an opinion, of course, but I mean this is not an experience that I can intelligently or empathetically speak about. Sympathetically, sure, but I mean I can't even pretend to understand the African-American experience in the United States, so I'm not going to. I don't know. Look, when I think critically about it, I feel like there are a lot of opportunities here, and I don't know the best way to pursue those opportunities in the best way for the players to maximize their platform. But I would hate for this to get lost in a political conversation like Colin Kaepernick's protest did 4 years ago.
Yeah, and I don't want it to get hijacked by anything on either side politically, where you have politicians trying to make it for their own gain either way, left, right, center, who cares? I don't think this is a political issue. I want them to take some next steps. I know that the Bucks tried to get on the phone or got through to the Wisconsin, attorney general and some high-ranking political officials in the state there, which is huge, to make their voices heard. And I think you're going to see more teams do that. And I think you're going to have to see more teams trying to, push legislation towards making things equitable, or, what they deem equitable for, Black people. And I think that shouldn't be politicized. I think that should just be, on either side politicized. And I don't think it should have been NBA players having to make that push. I think this should have been done by state legislators. I think this should have been done by whoever, to where the NBA didn't have to get involved. Mm-hmm. And I think, the NBA and the players are saying we can only do so much right now without, boycotting or going on strike. And, they've come out and said, well, now it's like, well, the kneeling wasn't enough. Putting, messages on the back of our jerseys wasn't enough. Putting Black Lives Matters on the court wasn't enough. What do we have to do to get people to listen to us and actually hear what we're trying to say? And this was the next logical step for him. And, you and I are both white. I'm not going to pretend to understand what it's like to be Black or a minority in this country. I have, friends that are minorities and friends that have talked to me about some of their experiences. And they vastly differ from what I'm doing, vastly different from the life that I got to live. And, that's why that's why Black people, that's why a lot of these minorities are standing up for, what they feel is right. And, I don't blame them for that, because the experience that I had and the experience you probably had are vastly different from the experiences that a lot of minorities and a lot of Black people in this country have had.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and again, I will never question the motives of anybody that is making this kind of stand, and it huge personal sacrifice. But that part, I think, additionally gets complicated, and I guess that's the last thing I'll say about it today. Just because, again, this is very raw, this is very new. I'm talking through this for the first time. I mean, I barely had time to wake up and work out and brush my teeth before I came in here and talked about this with you. So if I sound unintelligent or inarticulate, it's just, because I'm like really verbally processing this for the first time. But the other thing that I think needs to be examined, and that it sounds like the players and the owners are going to discuss this morning and I'm sure into this afternoon, is for players like LeBron James, like Damian Lillard, like Giannis Antetokounmpo, any of those players that feel comfortable making the stance, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, I imagine, spearheading the Clippers, essentially agreeing to postpone the season. It is easier for those guys because they're going to be just fine. They've made an unbelievable amount of money. They're still going to get their endorsement money, and they still have a platform. But for the vast majority of players in the NBA, we've talked a lot about PJ Dozier, who's finally coming into his own, who's sort of finding some solid footing with the Denver Nuggets. There are a lot of players in the NBA that really kind of fit that mold that, A, won't have the platform if the NBA is not there to give them a platform, and B, can't necessarily afford to just say, hey, you know what, we're just going to take a couple years off in the prime of our career. Maybe they were going to, donate the money if they had it. Maybe they just, need that to live, but they don't have the same flexibility as the stars. And so I wonder what the resolution will be between sort of the upper class of players in the NBA in terms of earning and the lower class that are going to say, hey, we understand, we support this, and we think that, this is a well-intentioned protest and boycott, but at the end of the day, like, this is our living, and we need to maintain this.
Yeah, and, I mean, Charles Barkley was kind of talking about it yesterday on TNT. I was listening to him, and he said that, this pandemic's been an inconvenience for him. It hasn't been bad because he's made a lot of money. He's made millions of dollars. He continues to make millions of dollars. He goes, this thing's really affected people. People have lost their jobs over this. And And, there are teams, like you mentioned, Kawhi, Paul George, Giannis, LeBron, Damian Lillard, CJ McCollum, all these guys have made their millions, have made money. They have things to fall back on if they don't play for the rest of the season or the rest of the year. If you're Chris Silva, you don't have that. You don't get, there's a time-sensitive element to this, where players have to understand, and especially the players that aren't making the millions, the multi-millions that they're going to make, that LeBron's going to make, have to know what the next steps are going to be, because they have to go find a way to make money, and find a way to support themselves and the lifestyles that they live. And it's going to be interesting. The next few days, the next few weeks are going to be very, very intriguing. Number one, to see what kind of change comes from this. If there's any legislation, if there's anything like that comes from this boycott, this protest, this strike, whatever you want to call it, and whether or not players can make money once the NBA comes back, whenever that might be, because there's some real life consequences if you don't return to playing, and there's some real life consequences if you do return to playing, in terms of your message and things like that. So I don't know what's next. I think Chris Webber said it yesterday when he was talking on TNT. He's like, I don't know what's next, and frankly, I don't care what's next. But you have to have some answers over the next day or two to really know kind of where things are headed with the NBA and what they're trying to do.
Oh, man, just as everything has started to get back to normal, just in terms of our routines, in terms of what we're used to, and the NBA bubble was working fantastically, and the playoffs were amazingly entertaining, and just like with COVID-19, something more important takes precedence and reminds us of how fragile this is, of how delicate this balancing act all is. And again, like I support the players doing this, but I hope that they can come together today or in the next couple days and put together a very specific vision of what they want to achieve, how they plan to achieve it, and again, what they can do, because this is a business, and they should use their platforms, but they also, have to consider all the other employees. There are 450 jobs. These are the 450 best basketball players in the country, or in the world, really, and the vast majority of them, rely on this. They rely on this. This is their job. There's a very, very, very small percentage at the top. But in a year that just never ceases to amaze me, Colin, it's been, I think, without a doubt, the hardest year of most people's lives. And for those of us that are lucky enough to get through that, and I don't say that at all ironically or tongue-in-cheek, for those of us that are lucky enough to get through 2020, it seems like maybe the long-term future, the long-term outcome of some of the most, horrible, uncomfortable conversations and moments that we've had globally, nationally, even locally. Hopefully this is going to be, certainly documentaries are going to be made, books are going to be written about this year, but hopefully all of this discomfort with dealing with the pandemic, not dealing with the pandemic, the politicization of the pandemic, with, increasingly just very plain conversations about racial injustices, hopefully all of these things on the other side will lead us to a much better place. But this is you have to hope that this is sort of the night is darkest just before the dawn, because it just when things start to feel like they're getting back to normal again, we're reminded of our own fragility, of our own humanity, and all of its rawness and all of its awfulness a lot of the times. But we have to collectively be able to use this for growth and navigate this as intelligently and compassionately as we can. So I really appreciate you doing this. I know this is not normally what we do. Not that you have any shortage of opinions, but you are a reporter, and you have a duty to objectivity. And this is I don't know. I guess we've done this relatively objectively, but it's hard to not get emotional and to not incorporate our feelings into some of these things. So I know it's a little bit different for some of you listening than what we normally do. But Colin, I appreciate you always for your hard work as a reporter, and I appreciate your candor and your emotion in this and talking about something complicated like this.
Yeah, and I think it's just, it's so cliche to say it's an important conversation to have, but it's important, and I think it's really important too to discuss things maturely instead of name calling and instead of firing back at tweets. And I think it's, what I might think is not what everybody thinks. I understand that. But I think it's important to hear both sides of things, and I think it's important to understand whether you're left, right, center, up, down, diagonal, whatever the hell you are in terms of your political affiliation, to listen to the other side, whether you agree with it or not, whether you think it's, one of the smartest arguments that the people can make or one of the dumbest. It's important to listen and understand that your background is not the same as everybody else's background. And the things you've experienced in life can vastly differ between people, between races, between genders, sexes. And it's important to understand that there's a lot of pain that people have lived through, whether that's, that they brought on themselves or not. It's important to understand that not everyone's lived the same life. And it's really, really important to discuss the fact of how can we advance change and make it so that this country, which was built on acceptance and built on the merging of different cultures and ethnicities and, races and genders, how can we get back to that point? It's never been to that point, but how can we get it to where every race, every gender feels comfortable in this country? And until we get there, I don't know if this is going to change or stop at any point.
Yeah, and that's I don't know. That's the hard part, because there's always going to be bad people in every industry. There's going to be racism. There's going to be prejudice. I don't know if there's any way to get rid of that, but I whatever we can do to disassemble the institutional racism, the institutional prejudices, I guess is sort of the immediate goal here. But Colin, all that was well said. I can't add anything else to that, and I'll just say, by the next time we talk, I think maybe we'll have some clarity on where this is leading us for all sports. Again, for the NBA, for Major League Baseball, we have seen, and for other sports that have yet to start, what is their contribution to this conversation? All of that remains to be seen. So we'll talk about it as soon as we get more clarity on it, and two, just to, I guess, return to where we started all this. Any more Carolina basketball as we get it here in the next couple weeks, whether it's schedule, whether it's any breaking news from practice, we will have all that. This is normally what we do here on the Hard Foul. So please rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast. I don't know. I feel weird closing this out today. I don't know how to do it. But rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. Follow Colin on Twitter @Colin Taylor. Read him on GamecockCentral.com. And for Colin, I'm Pearson. And whether it's basketball, whether it's social, whatever it is, if it pertains to the world of sports and basketball specifically, I guess we'll be talking about it next time. So thanks for listening. We'll talk to you then.